My name is Evelyn Harper, and the morning I realized happiness wasn't something you find, but something you protect, was the same morning a 6-year-old boy asked me if I knew how to find it. I remember the shock of his words more clearly than I remember my own wedding day. Maybe because his question felt heavier than any vow I ever made. Maybe because I finally understood the answer. It was just after sunrise on the church porch. The old wooden boards creaked under my feet as I swept leaves into a neat little pile. The church wasn't anything grand, just a community place with chipped white paint and a front door that stuck when the weather got wet. I'd been sweeping there every morning for years, a habit I never planned, but one that became my anchor. I liked the sound of the broom, the quiet rhythm of bristles on wood, the breeze carrying the scent of dew and old pine trees. It made me feel like life still made sense. That day, Noah walked up with his backpack hanging off one shoulder. He always took the long route to school so he could stop and talk for a minute. Sweet boy. The kind of child who still believed even the dusty air around him held miracles. He climbed onto the bench, his legs dangling in the space between wood and earth. Then he asked it. Just like that, without ceremony, Miss Evelyn. How do I find happiness? His voice cracked on the last word, like it was too big for him to carry alone. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, one hand on the broom, the other on my hip, watching the sun spread gold across the horizon like a promise. The boy looked up at me, eyes squinting against the light. He deserved an answer. Maybe that's why the question hurt. I walked over, sat beside him, and placed my hand gently on his shoulder. I could feel his little heartbeat through his jacket. Let me tell you a story, I said, and I watched him straighten up like children do when they know a secret's coming. I didn't tell him this part, but I was shaking inside because I knew once I started, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. Years ago, I thought happiness lived inside 4 walls, specifically the 4 walls of the house I shared with my husband Robert. Our town was small, the kind where everyone knew what color your curtains were and whether you bought name-brand cereal or store-brand. We had a little clapboard house with a screened porch that smelled like summer rain. The kind of home you see on postcards where life looks easier than it ever actually is. Back then, Sundays meant church and potlucks casseroles in glass dishes with labels stuck to the lids. Neighbors waved when they mowed their lawns. Kids rode bikes in circles until porch lights flicked on. It all looked like happiness, and I tried so hard to believe it was. But inside our house, well, let's just say the quiet felt louder than any argument. Robert wasn't cruel in the way people warn you about. He never raised his voice or his hand. His weapon was indifference. Silence sharpened into something that cut deep. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, and I'd talk about my day at the choir or the garden, or a funny thing I heard at the diner, and he'd nod like I was a fly buzzing near his ear. The longer we lived together, the smaller I felt, like I was shrinking out of sight. Caroline, his daughter from a previous marriage, didn't care much for me. She was polite in public and cold in private. She'd leave comments that clung to my ribs for days. You're just temporary. Dad's house will be mine again someday. She said things like that while flipping her hair and checking her lipstick in the hall mirror. I used to pray for patience, for grace, for the strength to hold my tongue. And I did. I held my tongue until it bled. I didn't know then that silence can be both a shield and a prison. The turning point came on an ordinary Wednesday, the kind of day you forget until you can't. I was cleaning out the desk in the living room when I found a letter. The envelope was half open, like someone started hiding it and lost their nerve. Inside was a document transferring the house deed. My house. My home. The one I helped rebuild with insurance money after a tornado tore half the roof off our bedroom. He'd transferred it to Caroline, quietly, behind my back, with a signature that looked like mine. I sat there on the floor, pages trembling in my hands, and for a moment I thought maybe happiness had never lived in those walls at all. Maybe I'd been trying to decorate a cage and call it a sanctuary. When I looked at Noah beside me on the church porch, swinging his legs like the world hadn't gotten heavy yet, I realized part of him was asking because he was afraid. Maybe someone at home raised their voice too much. Maybe he heard grown-ups fighting about bills. Maybe he saw something that made him wonder if happiness breaks. I didn't tell him about the deed. Not yet. I still needed a moment to breathe. But I told him this. Happiness isn't all sunshine and sweet tea, Noah. It's work. It's choosing what to hold on to and what to let go. He nodded, even if he didn't understand. 6-year-olds often nod when the world gets too big. He tucked his backpack closer to his chest, and I noticed the zipper was frayed like it had been tugged a few too many times. The broom rested against my leg, and the sunrise kissed the porch with gold. Somewhere inside the church, the heater hummed like an old lullaby. It all felt like a beginning. I didn't know how to finish the story yet, not for him. But I knew I would. One part at a time. And maybe by the end, we'd both understand happiness a little better. I didn't sleep the night after finding that letter. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles like time itself was dragging its feet. The fanlight made soft shadows on the walls, dancing like ghosts of every memory I ever tried to convince myself was happy. Morning came with the smell of coffee I didn't make, and footsteps I knew by heart. Life went on around me, but something inside me refused to move, as if my heart had finally planted its feet and said no more. Back then, my world was small. Not in a sad way, just the ordinary shape of a life built in a small American town. Every grocery store clerk knew my name. The church secretary saved me a seat at meetings. At the diner, they knew I liked my eggs over easy on Saturdays and scrambled on Sundays. I had a choir robe with my initials sewn inside the collar. Real roots, real places. That matters when you're our age, over 60. You start to realize life isn't about chasing horizons, it's about noticing the ground beneath your feet. But roots can strangle you if you're not careful. After Robert left for work that morning, I stood in the kitchen with the letter in my hands. The deed transfer paper felt heavier than any cast iron pan in the cabinets. I made myself a cup of coffee just to have something warm to hold, something that didn't feel like betrayal. The house was quiet, our house, though I didn't know if I had the right to call it that anymore. The refrigerator hummed, and the clock over the stove ticked loud enough to count my breaths. For the first time in years, I wondered what my life might look like outside those walls. A thought strong enough to scare me. Freedom sounds romantic until it knocks on your door and asks you to pack a bag. Around 10 o'clock, Martha showed up. She's the kind of friend who never needed an invitation, just a reason, and she always found one. She let herself in, announcing her arrival with the slam of the screen door, and the smell of cinnamon from her purse. She always carried gum like it was medicine. One look at me and she knew. "What happened?" she asked, voice softer than usual. She didn't sit. She waited. I handed her the papers. Her brow furrowed. She was quiet for the longest 30 seconds of my life. Then she looked up at me with eyes full of fire. "He can't do this, Evelyn. He can't just—" "He did," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said the words like I was telling her the weather. Martha pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "Honey, this isn't just unkind. This is planning a life without you in it." I stared at the table. The wood grain looked like roads on a map. Roads that led somewhere else. Somewhere I'd never dared to think about. "He used my signature," I whispered. "Or tried to." It's not mine, I would remember. We sat there for a long time. Two women in their 60s drinking lukewarm coffee and sharing a silence that felt like stitching up a wound. Without drama, without shouting. Just truth sitting between us like an extra cup on the table. Martha reached out and covered my hand with hers. You don't have to fight him, but you don't have to stay either. Her words weren't advice, they were permission. The next day, I went back to the church. I didn't want to hide, I just needed somewhere I could breathe without smelling the memories. The church hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and old hymnals. The pew cushions still squeaked when you sat down. And the choir room piano was always a little sharp in the higher keys, a flaw I used to resent, but suddenly felt grateful for. Imperfections make things real. That's where I found Mr. Clarkson, retired lawyer, longtime usher, the kind of man who wore suspenders even when his pants fit fine. He greeted me with his usual half smile and an offer of butterscotch from the jar he kept in his coat pocket. After the pleasantries, I asked if he had a moment. He had more than that. He had patience. He had insight. And most importantly, he had answers. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't villainize Robert. He just laid out the facts: forged signature, improper witness, possible claim to shared financial contribution. Grounds to contest, grounds to reverse, grounds to walk away with dignity. Not revenge, just balance. Evelyn, he said, leaning back in his chair. There's a difference between breaking a thing and refusing to hold it together alone. Those words landed like scripture. That evening, I returned home. Robert was at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes, like nothing in our world had shifted. He didn't look up when he spoke. You were gone a long time. I needed clarity, I said. My voice surprised me, steady, like a bridge that would not sway. He dried his hands and finally met my eyes. Clarity about what? I held up the letter. Something flickered on his face. Not guilt, calculation. Like he was assessing how much I knew. That's old paperwork, he said. Just planning for Caroline's future? You worry too much. It has my name on it, I replied. My forged name. You planned my absence. The clock ticked. The house felt smaller. That's not fair, he muttered. You always make things dramatic. I thought of every birthday where he forgot to say anything beyond your cake is on the counter. Every Thanksgiving where he carved the turkey like a king, and I sat beside him like someone who should be grateful for scraps of attention. Every time Caroline's lipstick prints on wine glasses looked like smirking mouths at the table. And how I convinced myself it was enough. I wasn't angry. I was awake. I won't argue, I told him. I won't scream. But I won't disappear either. He scoffed. Like the idea of me making a decision startled him. He left the room. I stayed. For the first time, I stayed not because I felt trapped, but because I needed to feel the floor under my feet as I reclaimed the right to stand. Later that night, I started gathering my receipts, my documents, my proof of contribution, my memories etched in ink and bank statements. Every page a heartbeat, every signature a step toward the door. I made tea and let the steam warm my face. Not to soothe myself, but to steady myself. I wasn't preparing to destroy him. I was preparing to rescue me. Wait for me. Say continue when ready. I used to believe that the worst kind of betrayal was loud slammed doors, broken dishes, shouting until voices cracked. Turns out the worst kind happens in silence. Quiet plans made behind your back. Smiles that hide signatures. The sound of a pen on paper deciding the course of your life without ever asking if you want to go. After meeting with Mr. Clarkson at the church, I went home feeling like I had a suitcase packed inside my chest. Not with clothes or keepsakes, but with choices. And choices have weight. I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. The floral wallpaper in the hallway I picked out after the tornado. The one that nearly took our bedroom roof. The rocking chair I saved for 3 months to buy. The photo frames that held memories that now felt like someone else's. For 20 years I thought Robert and I were building something. Turns out, only I was adding bricks. He was busy drawing escape routes. In a town like ours, nothing stays secret for long. The gossip chain is faster than the postal service. But somehow, this had stayed hidden. That still baffles me, the quiet ways people can make you vanish while still smiling at you across a table. I spent the next week gathering everything I could. I became a detective in my own home. A historian of my own life. I dug through drawers, files, attic boxes. I found receipts for lumber from when we rebuilt the porch. Invoices from the electrician who rewired the kitchen after the storm. Every check I'd written. Every budget I'd made stretched just to keep us afloat. And there were other things. Letters I'd written but never sent. Journals. Notes I made to remind myself to smile more, to forgive faster, to try harder. Pages stained with the kind of tears that fall when no one is looking. I packed those too, not out of sentiment, but as proof that I was real. That I lived there. That I mattered. I made copies of everything. 3 sets. One for me. One for Mr. Clarkson. One hidden in the choir room filing cabinet under hymnal maintenance, the place no one ever checked. One afternoon, Caroline stopped by. She breezed in like she owned the air. Expensive perfume heels that clacked across the hardwood like she was keeping time in some cruel anthem. She didn't bother to knock. "I heard you've been asking questions," she said, leaning on the counter like she was posing for a commercial. I didn't answer. I just kept stirring the pot of soup on the stove. Chicken noodle from scratch. The kind of soup you make when you need something gentle to hold your insides together. She laughed, a sharp little sound. "You know Dad was always trying to help you. You should be grateful he's thinking about the future." Grateful. The word tasted like rust. "The future," I repeated. "Whose?" She tilted her head, eyes glinting. "Mine, of course. Eventually. That house is part of our family legacy." "Our," I said softly. "Or yours?" She blinked like she hadn't considered that distinction. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be sitting at the dinner table, with elbows planted like stakes, marking her territory. Maybe she was scared too. Maybe she thought claiming the house meant securing love. Or maybe she just wanted to win. I didn't hate her. I just felt tired. She pushed off the counter. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said. I smiled. It wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the kind of smile you wear when you finally decide to stop auditioning for a role in someone else's story. "I won't," I replied. That night, I went to the cabin I inherited from my mother. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by tall grass and a broken fence. For years, I thought of it as a burden, something I didn't know what to do with. But stepping inside, smelling the cedar walls and dust, and the faint ghost of my mother's perfume, I realized it wasn't a burden. It was a beginning. The cabin needed work. The faucet dripped. The floors creaked. The air felt stale, like it had been waiting too long. But it was mine. Every nail. Every splinter. Mine. I stood in the middle of the living room and imagined a table there. A quilt over the back of the couch. A kettle on the stove. A bed with clean sheets and windows that let in the morning light. Happiness might not be a house, but peace can have an address. I cleaned for hours, swept cobwebs, scrubbed countertops, washed windows. Each chore felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I lit a candle, and the room glowed like an old heartbeat waking up. On the way back to town, I stopped at the grocery store. The cashier, Donna, asked how I was. Starting over, I said. She didn't ask for details. She just nodded and double-bagged my milk. Kindness comes in small gestures like that. The next Sunday, I sat in the church pew beside Martha. The choir hummed through warm-ups. The sermon was about pruning trees, how cutting away dead branches helps new ones grow. The pastor didn't look at me specifically, but every word felt pointed. Not painful, just true. After the service, I walked up to Robert. He was talking to a group of elders, laughing like his world hadn't shifted. I waited until he finished. "We need to talk," I said. He looked surprised, like he hadn't expected me to speak with so much clarity. In private, I added. We walked outside to the parking lot. The autumn air was crisp, leaves scattering like confetti in slow motion. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "What now?" he asked, impatient. "I know about the deed," I said. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I've gathered proof of my financial investment. I'm not staying in that house. But I'm not walking away from what's mine." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I won't fight you," I said. "I won't scream, but I will not be erased." For a moment, we stood there, two people who once shared a life, now sharing only the space between heartbeats. He looked smaller to me then. Or maybe I was standing taller. He finally nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough to take the first step. When I walked away from him, I didn't look back. The church behind me was the same, but I wasn't. They say every storm starts with a single shift in the wind. For me, that shift happened the moment I realized I didn't need Robert's permission to live my own life. I didn't need his approval to breathe. I didn't need his house to have a home. Once that truth settled and everything else began to move slowly at first, like a wheel stuck in mud, then faster, like it finally found the road. I spent the next week preparing. Not for a fight, I'd had enough of battles no one knew I was losing, but for a transition. A quiet shift of power that felt like folding laundry, mundane, necessary, strangely sacred. I boxed up things that were mine beyond question: my mother's quilt, the teacup with the blue roses, the recipe cards written in my grandmother's cursive. I left behind anything that felt like it belonged to the ghost of the woman I used to be. The cabin became my base, my workshop of becoming. I fixed what I could fix, tightened cabinet hinges, hammered in loose nails, washed the curtains that smelled like thyme. I planted mums outside the door, the deep orange ones that look like fire when the sun hits them. I bought a second-hand table from a garage sale and painted it the soft green of hope. For the first time in years, I could hear my heartbeat without flinching. On the third day, I met with Mr. Clarkson again. He had already filed for the deed reversal and started the paperwork for a fraud investigation. His office smelled like old books and peppermint, and his desk was cluttered in a way that made him seem trustworthy, like he had more important things to care about than dust. "You've done everything right so far," he told me, flipping through my documents. "This won't be quick. It may not be comfortable, but you're standing on solid ground." I nodded. I'd never felt solid before. It felt like wearing shoes after years of walking barefoot, strange but good. He leaned back, adjusting his suspenders. "Evelyn, I want you to remember something. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to sink." Those words felt like winter sunlight, thin but warm enough to make you believe spring will come. From there, I made a plan, a patient one. A plan rooted in clarity, not chaos. I listed every step, every task, every person I needed to speak to. Not to build an army, but to build accountability. I went to the bank to secure my accounts. I met with the choir director to let her know I might miss a few practices. I talked to the electric company to set up service in my name at the cabin. Ordinary tasks that became bricks in the new foundation of my life. I didn't tell Robert anything more than necessary. I didn't owe him my fear anymore. Caroline, however, made her attempts. She called twice, left messages dripping with urgency. Dad is stressed. Can't you just let this go? Let it go. The request of those who never carried the weight. I didn't respond. Silence can be a shield. It can also be a boundary. One afternoon, I found myself in the church pantry stacking canned peaches on the shelves. Volunteering had always been part of my life. Service made me feel human again when the world made me feel like furniture. That day, Mrs. Boone, a woman whose hands always smelled like ivory soap and pie crust, worked beside me. She paused, rested a can against her hip. "You look lighter," she said. I blinked. Lighter. "Like someone opened a window in you?" she replied. I didn't know people could see it. I didn't know I'd been that closed. I told her I was making changes. Not the details. Just the truth. She nodded as if she'd heard the story 1,000 times. "You know," she said, "sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is refuse to be needed in the wrong ways." I put that sentence in my pocket like a keepsake. I still haven't taken it out. That evening, I drove to the cabin and sat on the floor in the middle of the living room. No lights on, just the quiet glow of dusk. I thought about all the years I tiptoed around a man who never once walked gently around me. I thought about every apology I made for existing too loudly, too softly, too inconveniently. I thought about the endless compromises that chipped away pieces of me like paint peeling from an old porch. And then I decided I was done apologizing. The next morning, I went to the church early. Before sunrise, before Noah would walk past with his backpack, before the choir started their warm-ups. I needed to see the world wake up on my terms. The air was cool. The porch boards felt familiar beneath my shoes. I leaned on the broom like it was a companion, and for a moment, the world was still. That's when I saw Robert's truck pull into the gravel lot. The headlights flashed across the church doors. He stepped out wearing the same coat he'd had for years, the one I patched up with elbow patches and extra thread. Funny how you can stitch a garment, but not a marriage. He walked toward me, shoulders rigid, jaw set. "Evelyn," he said, voice clipped, "we need to talk." I nodded. "I'm listening." He looked around as if expecting an audience. Maybe he needed witnesses. Maybe he needed someone to validate his version of the story. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "Why you're making everything so dramatic." There it was. The line men like him keep in their breast pocket, the dismissal disguised as confusion. "I'm not being dramatic," I replied. "I'm being accurate." His eyes narrowed. "You're throwing away everything we built." "We didn't build it," I said. "I built it. You drafted the exit." His mouth tightened. Silence stretched between us like a rope, one he used to pull me closer. But now, I could finally drop. "I don't want to fight you," I said, "but I won't let you define my ending." "And you think that cabin is your future?" He scoffed. "No," I answered. "I'm my future. The cabin is just where I'll put my furniture." He stared at me as if trying to find the version of me he used to manage. She wasn't there. I turned away and began sweeping. The leaves scattered in front of me like pages of a book being flipped. "Evelyn," he called, voice sharp. "You'll regret this." I paused, took a breath, felt the sunrise on my back. "I already regretted staying," I said. "This is just me finally stopping." He didn't speak again. The gravel crunched under his boots as he left. The truck door slammed. The engine rumbled away. I didn't watch him go. I watched the sun rise. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to be fire. It could be dawn. I used to think a day of reckoning would feel like thunder. Like the sky splitting open, like the ground shaking. But the day everything came to a head arrived on a Tuesday that smelled like apples and rain, the kind of day that would have passed like any other, if not for the truth finally taking a seat at the table. The morning started with coffee at the cabin. I drank it by the window, steam rising like prayer. I'd put fresh curtains up the night before, simple white fabric that moved like ghosts when the breeze slipped in. I didn't feel scared or triumphant. I felt ready. Like I'd reached the last page of a chapter, and my hand hovered over the corner, waiting to turn. Around noon, I drove back to town. The house looked the same as always, shutters that needed repainting, mailbox leaning a little, the porch swing groaning in the wind. Funny how a place can hold so many memories and still feel like borrowed clothes, never fitting quite right. Caroline's car was already in the driveway. A new one, shiny, white, expensive. I wondered what promises she thought were paved into those tires. When I unlocked the door, voices floated from the dining room. I could smell pot roast, the kind Robert made when he wanted to pretend everything was normal. He was good at normal. He could polish it until even I believed in it. I stepped into the doorway. Robert sat at the head of the table, Caroline beside him, flipping through a stack of glossy pamphlets. Real estate brochures, beachside condos, a future I wasn't supposed to be in. They stopped talking when they saw me.
"There you are," Robert said, like I was late to something I didn't know existed.
Caroline straightened her blazer. "We were just discussing options. Dad thinks we should sell sooner rather than later if the market holds." Dad. The word stuck to the air, ignoring me like a shadow.
I set my purse down. "We need to talk," I said.
Caroline rolled her eyes. Oh God. Robert glared at her before turning to me. "Evelyn, can't we at least try to be civil? You've made your point." I shook my head. I haven't yet, but I will. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for weeks. Evidence like stones to steady a bridge.
"First," I said, placing the paperwork in front of them, "the deed transfer was invalid. The signature wasn't mine. The lawyer confirmed it. The reversal has already been filed."
Caroline's mouth opened, then closed, like she forgot the words she was planning to use. Robert leaned back in his chair. "You could have talked to me first."
"I did," I said. "You just didn't listen." Silence, heavy like wet wool.
Second, I continued sliding more papers across. These are receipts for every major repair to the house from the last 20 years. My contributions, my financial investment. This isn't just a home. It's proof of my life. Even if the law didn't see it, which it does, I do. Caroline flipped through the pages like they were fiction, shaking her head as if disbelief could change the ink. "And third," I said, pulling out the last document, "I'm leaving. Not running. Leaving. On my terms." Robert's jaw clenched. "So that's it. You think walking away is justice?" I sat in the chair across from them, folding my hands on the table. I wanted to look calm. I didn't have to pretend I was calm. "No," I said. "Justice is that I get to choose my ending. I won't fight you for the house. The law is handling what needs to be handled, but I won't stay where I'm not seen."
Caroline scoffed. "We never asked you to stay."
That stung, but not like it used to. More like a memory of pain than pain itself. "I know," I replied. "And for a long time, I thought that meant I failed. Now I know it means I'm free." The room held its breath. I stood. "I'll come for the rest of my things this weekend. I won't take anything that isn't mine. I won't speak ill of you. I won't drag this through the town. You don't have to worry about me ruining your reputation." Robert's eyes darted away. That hit something. "I don't want to hurt you," I said, and I meant it. "I just don't want to disappear to make you comfortable." They didn't speak. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe silence was finally heavy on their side instead of mine. I stepped away from the table, and for a moment I hesitated. Not because I doubted myself, because endings deserve a pause. They deserve to be acknowledged. That night, after the tornado, I said quietly, turning back to look at Robert when the roof was gone and the walls shook, "I remember telling you we could rebuild. You didn't say anything. I thought it was fear. But now I think, maybe you'd already decided you didn't want to rebuild with me. He looked up. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, recognition. It doesn't matter now.
I rebuilt anyway, I said, and I'll do it again. I walked out.
On the porch, I paused at the top step. The wind rustled the leaves. The swing creaked. I felt old versions of myself tugging at my sleeves, asking me to stay, to try again, to hope harder.
But I'd already tried. Hope is not a leash.
I took one step, then another, each one lighter than the last.
When I reached the yard, I heard the door open behind me. It was Caroline.
She didn't come outside. She just stood there and said, "You could have fought harder." I turned and met her eyes. I could have, but fighting to stay where I'm unwanted isn't bravery. It's self-burial. For the first time, she didn't have a retort. I walked to my car, put the key in the ignition. The cabin was waiting. My life was waiting. As I drove away, the house grew small in the rearview mirror. Not like a loss, like a page finishing. That evening, I sat on the cabin porch, feet propped on the railing, rain tapping the roof like applause from the sky. The mums glowed in the low light like little embers refusing to burn out. I sipped tea and whispered to the air, "This is not the end."
And it wasn't. It was the middle of the beginning.
I woke the next morning in the cabin to birdsong and the smell of rain-soaked earth. I couldn't remember the last time I woke up without bracing myself for something. For years, mornings felt like stepping into a room where everyone had been arguing before I arrived. But that morning, nothing was waiting to pounce. The air didn't crackle with unspoken resentment. The silence wasn't sharp. It was soft, like a quilt pulled up to your chin. I brewed coffee and sat by the window. The steam curled up like a blessing. It tasted like a life I didn't know I was allowed to want. Rebuilding didn't happen all at once. It happened in motions so small they could have been missed. Cleaning the gutters, fixing the mailbox, painting the porch railings a shade of blue that reminded me of summer skies. I hung wine chimes near the back door. Their song was gentle, like someone humming a tune they learned in childhood. On Sundays, I still went to church. I swept the porch before the service like I always did, but the broom felt lighter in my hands. I felt lighter. People noticed. Mrs. Boone said I looked new. Noah said I smelled like cookies and sunshine. I suppose healing smells like something different to everyone. Noah kept walking to school the long way so he could stop and talk. He'd sit on the bench with his lunchbox on his lap, telling me about school, how the teacher let them raise chicks in the classroom, how recess was shorter now because the principal said kids got too wild, how he wished someone would teach him how to whistle. He never asked again about happiness. He didn't have to. He was watching me learn it. I started volunteering more, the food pantry on Wednesdays, the after-school reading club on Fridays. I found pieces of myself in the stacks of books and the canned peaches and the little hands tugging at my sleeve. The world didn't need me to be a wife to make me matter. I mattered just by being a person.
The choir director asked me to lead warm-ups. I used to shrink into the back row, trying not to take up space. Now my voice filled the room. Not loud, just present. I learned that volume isn't the only measure of strength.
Sometimes in the early evenings, I'd sit on the cabin porch and watch the sun dip behind the trees. Fireflies rose from the grass like sparks from an unseen flame. I'd think about Robert, not with longing, not with bitterness, just memory, like a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. I heard things, of course. Small towns spill information like milk on a counter, slowly but impossible to miss. Caroline tried to list the house, but the deed reversal froze the process. A legal mess, they said. Awkward, they whispered. I never repeated what I heard. I just listened, nodded, and went back to painting the trim on the cabin windows. Some folks waited for me to gloat. I didn't. I couldn't. Victory isn't a meal I know how to digest. Peace tastes better. About a month after I moved, Caroline came to the church. She stood on the porch while I swept, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She looked like someone trying to hold on to dignity with hands too small. I didn't stop sweeping. I didn't make it hard. I just waited.
I didn't think you'd actually leave, she said.
I know, I replied.
I didn't think you meant it. I know. She looked down at her shoes. For the first time, she seemed young. Not childish, just young. Like someone who realized too late that life isn't a game with winners. I thought if I didn't claim things first, I'd lose them, she admitted. My broom paused midair. It's possible to lose things without ever owning them, I said. And it's possible to own things that never belong to you. She nodded. Maybe she understood. Maybe she didn't. Understanding isn't a prerequisite for closure. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. Not every wound needs an audience to heal. Later, I learned she started seeing a therapist in the next town. She stopped trying to sell the house. She even joined a sewing group at the library. People grow when they stop trying to prune other people. I hoped she found something like happiness, even if we never shared a table again. One afternoon, I saw Robert at the grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle holding a box of bran flakes like it weighed 100 pounds. I could have walked past him, pretended not to see. But that didn't feel like freedom. That felt like hiding. So I walked up and said, "Hello, Robert." He blinked. The moment stretched. Then he nodded. "You look well," he said. "I am," I replied, and I was. We didn't talk about the house, or the past, or who was right. We talked about the weather, the frost coming early, the birds leaving sooner than usual. It was civil. It was strange. It was enough. When we parted, he said, "I hope you're happy." "I'm learning," I answered, and I was. Driving home, I rolled down the window. The wind tangled in my hair like a child's fingers. The sky was the kind of blue that makes you want to start over. Back at the cabin, I walked to the garden. The mums had spread bright and stubborn. I knelt in the dirt and touched the petals. They were soft, alive, growing. "Look at you," I whispered, "planting your own happiness." That evening, Noah found me on the church porch. He'd lost a button on his jacket. I sewed it back while he watched. "Miss Evelyn," he asked softly, "are you happy?" I thought about the cabin, the choir, the quiet, the wind chimes, the coffee steam, the mums, the feeling of keys that belonged to a door I wanted to open. "Some days," I said, "some moments. Happiness isn't a place you stay. It's a place you visit. The trick is learning the way back." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Maybe it did. He hugged me before running off. His backpack bounced like a heartbeat. As he reached the path, I called after him, "Noah." He turned. "Happiness likes to follow people who help," I said. He grinned and waved before disappearing down the road. I sat back, broom resting beside me. The porch light flickered on. The sky blushed into evening. There was no triumphant music, no applause, just a woman sitting on a porch in a small American town, knowing she had survived something that once convinced her she wouldn't. Sometimes that's enough. I never meant to answer Noah's question with my whole life, but some questions deserve more than a sentence. They deserve a journey. And on the morning he asked me again, not with words, but with a look, I knew it was time to finish the story. The sun was barely up, just a pale slice of gold across the horizon. Dew clung to the church porch like tiny stars. I sat on the same wooden bench where he first asked me about happiness. The same bench where I began to unspool the story of a woman who forgot she was allowed to want things. Today, I felt the ending forming like breath in the cold. Noah climbed up beside me, swinging his feet. My mom says we're moving, he said quietly. To Ohio. She got a job. I'm scared I won't like it there. Fear, the oldest traveler in the world. I put my hand on his shoulder. That familiar small shoulder that once held the weight of a question too big for him. Being scared doesn't mean you can't be happy, I said. It just means your heart knows you're heading somewhere that matters. He nodded, eyes shiny. Then he leaned his head against my arm. Children know when words have finished their work. Miss Evelyn, he said softly, did you ever stop being sad after you left? I took a slow breath. The answer was not simple, but it was true. Sadness doesn't always leave, I told him. But it becomes a room in your house, not the whole house. You learn to visit it only when you need to. And you keep the door open so it doesn't grow mold. He laughed a little, even though he didn't fully understand. Laughter is proof that the heart has hands. It reaches even without knowing where. I watched the sun climb. It painted the church steps in gold. The broom leaned against the wall, a witness to all the lives that walked across those boards. I want to tell you something I said. Something I learned too late, but just in time. He sat up straighter. Happiness isn't something you find like a coin on the ground, I continued. It's something you plant, and protect, and prune. It's a little like gardening. You make space for it, you water it, and sometimes you have to pull the weeds. Weeds, he asked. People who don't want you to grow. Places that make you small. Choices that shrink your world. You pull them gently, but you pull them. He looked at his shoes, thinking. I could almost see the thought settling in his chest like a seed. Just then, footsteps approached. I turned to see Caroline standing at the edge of the porch. She looked different. Not like a woman who won a battle. Not like someone who lost. More like someone who finally realized she'd been fighting the wrong war. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded. Noah slid off the bench and muttered, I'll go practice whistling before disappearing around the corner. Caroline sat beside me. Her blazer was gone. She wore a simple sweater, hair pulled back. Her eyes were softer. I wanted to say, she began, then paused, gathering the words. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. You were never trying to take anything from me. I think I just didn't know where I fit. And I made you smaller so I could feel bigger. Hearing it didn't undo the past, but it loosened the knot around it. Thank you, I said. It means something. She exhaled shakily. Dad misses you, she added. He won't say it, but he does. I nodded. I hope he's okay. You don't want to see him. I thought about the fan shadows on our bedroom ceiling, the nights I shrank myself, the mornings I pretended, the years I mistook silence for safety. I don't need to, I said. Forgiving someone doesn't require a front row seat to their life. She blinked back tears. Do you forgive me? Forgiveness is not a gift. It's a door. And like any door, it doesn't erase what's outside it, it just lets in air. I do, I said. Her shoulders sagged like she'd been holding up a house alone. Thank you, she whispered. I touched her hand once, a gesture like a bookmark placed gently in a closed chapter. We don't have to be close, I said, but we don't have to be enemies either. She nodded. I'd like that. She stood squeezing my hand before she left. It didn't feel like reconciliation in a movie. No sweeping music, no final bow. Just two women choosing not to continue a pattern. After she left, Noah returned. You okay? He asked. I smiled. I think so. Maybe for the first time.
He sat beside me again. The sunlight reached us like an invitation.
"Can you finish the story now?" he whispered.
I looked at him, this little boy with a backpack full of marbles and crayons and fears he didn't yet have names for.
"Yes," I said, "I can."
And so I did. I told him how leaving didn't fix everything, how healing is not linear, how some days I still woke up expecting disappointment to greet me like a coat I had to put on, how sometimes I missed the version of myself who didn't know better because she had hope before she had truth. But I also told him about the cabin, the mums, the coffee steam, the choir, the wind chimes, the freedom to put a quilt wherever I wanted, even on the wall if I felt like it, the quiet joy of feeding birds in the morning, the ease of being alone without being lonely. Life is a story you get to edit, I told him, but you don't tear out the pages. You just write a better next chapter.
He leaned his head on my arm again.
"Will you miss me?" he asked. "Every day you're not here," I replied. "But I'll be happy knowing you're building your story."
He sniffled. "I want to be brave like you."
"You already are," I whispered.
The church bell rang, signaling the hour. A sound like punctuation. I stood, picked up the broom, and offered it to him. "Start here," I said. "Happiness likes to follow people who help."
He took its small hands, gripping the handle. Then he swept. Leaves skittered like laughter. As I watched him, I felt the ending settle gently around me. Not a door slamming shut. A door clicking closed, because the wind changed. I walked down the porch steps and stood in the grass, looking back just once, not from fear, but respect. The porch, the bench, the broom, the boy. They would all live on without me. And that was okay.
Some stories continue after you leave the page.
Before I walked away, I turned back and spoke to the empty morning air, to whoever needed to hear it. "If you're listening," I said, "don't wait for permission to choose peace. Don't wait for applause to leave what hurts. Don't let fear teach you that endurance is the same thing as love."
The sunlight caught in my hair like confetti.
"And when you're ready," I whispered, "come find me. I'll be in the quiet planting happiness like it's something that grows."
Then I stepped forward. My story didn't end. It just became mine.